With the release of the Apollo Justice Trilogy for the perusal of gamers all around the world, Capcom have done another classic move of not making a mainline Ace Attorney game. Don't worry guys, it'll happen at some point. This remastered compilation of Apollo Justice, Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice have brought a lot of new eyes to this somewhat infamous trio of games. Often they stand in contrast to the original, much beloved Phoenix Wright trilogy, and although the sequel trilogy, as they're known in the community, isn't quite the Apollo Justice Trilogy, for reasons we'll get into, it's a good enough name for a business venture. Welcome viewers, I'm Vivat Veritas, and this is a video about a franchise that's really made an impression on me recently. Having finished the Apollo Justice Remastered Trilogy about 3 months ago by the time this video comes out, I've got a few thoughts and hey, why not put them here? It's my channel. Since I was playing the Apollo Justice Trilogy while writing and just after finishing my Rousey character analysis, I was very much in the mindset of thinking about the characters of these fine games while playing. Perhaps it is for that reason that I thought quite a bit about what the hell Apollo is actually doing in his own trilogy. The characterization of the main three defense attorneys, Phoenix, Athena and Apollo, in the trilogy is a topic of much discussion and debate in the community. But as I'm relatively new to the whole thing, I'll hopefully be bringing a new pair of eyes to the whole thing. Either that or I'll just be rehashing decades of discourse, but that'll do too. To be frank, Apollo is probably my least favourite of the three main attorneys, and an emphasis on the favourite there. I still absolutely love him, but well, we'll get into it. Regardless, Apollo's existence as both a character and an icon within the games that make up his eponymous trilogy is something that I think is super interesting from an analytical lens, and the way that he informs the themes of the series and is in turn informed by them, and sometimes isn't, is well worth the time to explore to the 3 subscribers I have who actually care about Ace Attorney. In case it wasn't obvious, massive spoilers ahead for Apollo Justice Ace Attorney Dual Destinies, and Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice. These are games that you should go into blind in my opinion, especially Spirit of Justice. So, you've been warned. If you're all good to go, let's focus our perception and look at Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. Join me, won't you? When it comes to the actual character of the Red Lawyer Demon within the universe of Ace Attorney, there is already a lot of complexity. One of the things that both the games and his character get flack for is the fact that he has an entirely different backstory in each game, and they're never really mentioned outside of those individual games. There is an important distinction here that I'd like to make though. None of these aspects of his character are actually contradictory. Whether they make sense thematically together is a different question. In the first game, we're introduced to Apollo's mechanic, like how Phoenix has his Magatama. Apollo has a natural gift to be able to pick on very small physical cues in people and can deduce their true feelings, but this is only particularly noticeable to him when he's wearing a special bracelet. Trucy also seems to have this gift, but she doesn't need a bracelet to use it because she's built different, and uses it to help Phoenix cheat at poker. Our little bug-eyed freak uses this ability a lot throughout the whole trilogy, but it's only revealed towards the end that the bracelet came from his mother, who he doesn't know. We're also introduced to a mysterious woman with amnesia in the third case of Apollo Justice called Lemuror, who definitely is not relevant. She's a really good singer who has the power to turn clavier orange during cutscenes, and a lot of the case revolves around her fictional place of origin and her backstory, even though she isn't the defendant or the culprit. This is pretty straightforward highlighting of the fact that she is important, and it's revealed later that she is actually the mother of Trucy Wright, aforementioned magic baby and poker cheat. As it also turns out, she's also the mother of Apollo Justice. This twist is mostly, or entirely, in service of the audience, as the payoff, as it were, is for the final case of the game, where Lemuror is the pivotal juror number 6, who decides the fate of the culprit. I'm kind of breezing over quite a bit of this, mostly because I want to talk about it more in another video, but essentially Lemuror is intrinsically connected to both Apollo and Trucy, and Apollo just doesn't know. A lot of people really don't like this, but honestly, I think it's kind of interesting. Apollo very much has the vibe of a self-made man. He doesn't think about his past, always moving forward, and leaves behind pretty much every figure from his past. His old boss, his parents, his adopted brother, all of these become simple stops along the way that he doesn't care to look back on. Therefore, him not knowing who his mother is isn't something he would particularly care about. Even when he gets a picture of his deceased biological father, he is touched, but it doesn't change anything for him. This kind of grounded reality of Apollo is key to his character, even if it kind of takes the impact out of some of those more dramatic moments. His grounded nature does take a bit of a turn when we get into his second backstory, in Dual Destinies. This game is mostly about Athena Sykes, as it should be, but Apollo gets some, sure, we'll call it characterization. He mentions a good childhood friend giving him advice a couple of times throughout the game, and the identity of this friend is revealed to be Clay Terran, aspiring astronaut. More like expiring astronaut, as he's the victim in the penultimate case of the game. I'd like to make an important note here. We never see Clay before this reveal, nor do we even get his name. He is just plonked down as the victim in this case. In fact, we don't even get that much first-hand characterization from him. We have a short flashback of Apollo and Clay talking as kids about how neither of them have mothers, and that's the extent of what we hear from him. On one hand, I do think it can be cool and interesting storytelling to have a character only viewed through the memories and opinions of others. Hello, Kazuma. But in this case, it is just one person's testimony, and we don't really see any of Clay's character come through it. It's simply a motivation for Apollo to be suspicious of Athena, and it feels very, fabricated? Obviously it is, it's a story, but it feels like a case of reverse engineering a concept. The writers needed conflict between Apollo and Athena, or some other way to get Apollo out of the picture, and decided that the best way to do it was to introduce a best friend whose only purpose is to die. I think, more importantly, it does a disservice to Apollo's character. It just takes the wind out of the sails of his character progression by making this decision and event feel kind of anticlimactic. I do want to talk about the actual event that this leads to a bit later for what it means to Apollo himself, but the fact of the matter is that by just introducing Clay in the same breath as killing him, both the character and the purpose of his existence are severely weakened. Well, now we're done with that, it's Dirk time, baby! This is Apollo's third backstory, seen in Spirit of Justice, and boy is it a doozy. I do have to explain Dirk first though, so to give some background, oh god, that's a lot of background to give. Dirk Saadmadi is public enemy number 1 for the murder of the previous Queen Amara, which is wrong for 2 separate reasons, and wants to completely overhaul the current legal system in a nation called Kurain. As it turns out, he has 2 sons, one biological and one adopted. The biological one is Nayuta, who ends up becoming a prosecutor and is the main prosecutor through Spirit of Justice. The other son is Apollo! Yep, Jove Justice, Apollo's biological dad, died in the fire that killed Amara, so Dirk was just like, yoink, my baby now! Dirk raises them for a bit and then goes off to do revolutionary stuff. He steals an orb and then hijacks the TV stations, but as it turns out he doesn't have the orb and now he's back in Phoenix Wright land. And that just about catches us up. I try to avoid synopses in my video, but so much of this is necessary knowledge to understand Dirk's and thus Apollo's character. Throughout the final case, this relationship is explored very in depth. How Apollo feels about his time as a child, his repressed and conflicted feelings about dealing with anyone or anything from the past, is really brought to the forefront by the opening of this old wound, so to speak. Dirk and Apollo's connection is very important for the game, as it gives Apollo actually something to care about in Kurain outside of helping Phoenix. The whole franchise, Apollo has kind of had that problem. It wasn't so much a problem in Apollo Justice, as of course he would still be learning from his idol and master Phoenix Wright on how to be a lawyer. However, as we get further through the trilogy, it stands out that Apollo doesn't really have a specific goal outside of be a lawyer. Nothing wrong with that, it's pretty much what Phoenix does, but it would be nice to have a protagonist that just isn't the same as the old one. Dirk's connections let Apollo become more than Phoenix's legacy. Instead, he can inherit Dirk's. Marginal improvements, but it ends up working better for reasons. The really big twist, among many within the final case of the game, is that Dirk has been dead the whole time. This is what happens when you have spirit mediums, I guess. There's a lot of that. His name is eventually cleared through the process of the final trial, but that's not really the point. The point is, Apollo finally has a real emotional moment that we experience. His feelings for Clay were externalized, yes, but we only saw them from Athena and Phoenix's perspective, not inside his own mind, and it also wasn't very good. This time though, we are playing as Apollo and we get to see within his mind, processing the loss of someone who he has still pretty conflicted feelings on. Throughout this whole case, we have seen Apollo finally break down some of the barriers he keeps up around people in his past. He's gotten along better with Dirk, he's tried to actively appeal to Nyuta rather than ignore or fight him like previously, and he's been forthcoming, or at least more forthcoming, about details about his past. Now though, he's faced with something that threatens to destroy that whole progression. The reality of his adopted father being dead makes him truly reckon with the fact that he's pushed everything away for so long, whether that's because he felt like he didn't need it or because he felt like he couldn't get close, and that those things don't necessarily last forever. Unlike previous moments in the franchise, this breakdown does not hinge around the inability to find innocence or guilt in a clear moment. No, in contrast with Apollo's logical standpoint throughout the whole franchise, this is about sheer crushing emotion. Will this completely drain him of the hope that he has of seeing Kura-in righted and Nyuta saved? The question hangs in the air for some time as Apollo processes his grief, but he knows that he can't falter here. He's a lawyer, like his father before him, and he knows that it's up to him to keep fighting the fight that Dirk has passed on to him, not only to save Kura-in, but to save Nyuta. He knows he can't keep running forever. Unlike the Lemon and Clay backstories, the Dirk section of Apollo's life, both before and after leaving Kura-in, has a very tangible effect on Apollo's perspective and character. While he was taught to trust others more in his past, this finally teaches him that he can't just ignore the past. While the Lemon and Clay backstories keep him rooted in the past, stagnating his character, Dirk revolutionizes, if you'll excuse the pun, Apollo's character. This is where his path differs from Phoenix's. Phoenix's character arc is all about finding what being a lawyer means to him and balancing the truth with care, but he butts head with the person that he has inherited his path from, Mia Fey. In this way, Apollo mirrors this progression but in a different sense. He too has to rebuke the path that Phoenix has put him on, instead electing to stay behind in Kura-in to change the legal system for the better, still following a path inherited, but one that was much more his, one that he felt like he needed to do, not for anyone else, but himself. Now that we've analysed the past of Apollo, it's time to analyse the present. The connections Apollo makes throughout the course of the game are just as important as the ones from before the game starts, and most notable of these are, of course, his connections with Phoenix and Athena, his co-workers. Thankfully, most people are pretty up to date with Phoenix's character, considering he's the face of the franchise, so we won't dilly-dally. Phoenix's connections with Apollo is the foundation of the first game, and has a lot to comment on about Apollo's character. As a defense attorney, Apollo naturally looks up to Phoenix a lot, the latter being one of the more famous attorneys around, but by the time they meet, Phoenix has already been disbarred and the dark age of the law has come into full effect. Despite this, Apollo still really admires and respects Phoenix, which is very interesting. Apollo is very concerned with the truth, naturally, but notably how this interacts with a sense of honesty. They sound like the same thing, but Apollo relies more on the emotional side of truth compared to Phoenix, who will often find contradictions in the truth via cold hard facts and sheer bluffing. Him maintaining respect for Phoenix as someone who can instinctually tell when people are lying or not tells both him and the audience that Phoenix has not fallen too far and deserves the respect and effort that Apollo extends to him despite his current situation. In Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, we see Phoenix help Apollo to use his natural gift for spotting lies and evoking emotion in others rather than logic. This especially comes to a head with the juror system. Although Phoenix's experience has been to value evidence above all else, this was also his downfall, so he views both the juror system and Apollo himself as ways to usher the court out of the dark age of the law through perception, emotion, and care. Although we don't see the juror system come up in mainline games again, it's clearly an example from Shu Takumi of Apollo's connections with Phoenix really bringing out Apollo's actual personality and personability, despite him being a pretty reserved and overly logical person at times. Part of this overly logical perspective is likely because of his contrast with fellow lawyer Athena Sykes. We've talked a bit about their relationship already when talking about Clay, but Athena and Apollo have quite a bit to do with each other, especially in Spirit of Justice when Phoenix is gallivanting around almost getting killed in Kura-in. Overall, Athena is positioned as the emotional one while Apollo is the logical one. This sounds a little contradictory to what I just said about him with Phoenix, right? That's right, it's because it is. After Apollo Justice, Apollo becomes more logical and stoic to a degree. This is likely due at least partly to the change in writing team for the trilogy changing with Dual Destinies, and with the introduction of Athena and reintroduction of Phoenix, they had to do something new. Thankfully, the interactions and balancing of Athena and Apollo are actually pretty good, disregarding the character inconsistencies of Apollo. Athena comes off as more naive, despite her own tragic backstory, and is much more laissez-faire about her thoughts than Apollo, who keeps things very close to his chest as previously mentioned. Athena is also terrible at lying, which I'd say Apollo does a little better at least. The moment that sums up his character in relation to Athena is in the final case of Dual Destinies, where he objects to Athena's innocence relating to Clay's death. He's done his own investigation, and although he is truly fighting for what he believes in, ultimately he reveals that he just wants someone to prove to him that Athena is innocent, that he can trust her. He cares about the truth so much, but even when all the evidence points towards something, he can't shake his gut feeling, and Athena and Phoenix teach him that he shouldn't. The aforementioned conflict that arises between the two is largely motivated by the fact that Apollo just doesn't tell anyone anything. He has this level of independence which makes sense considering his past, but with Athena and Phoenix he eventually realizes that he doesn't have to be alone if he doesn't want to. This transitions us nicely to another individual we have to talk about, Christoph Gavin. This smarmy son of a bitch is a fantastic character, and we first see him as Apollo's boss in his first case. What becomes very quickly apparent, thanks to the word of unemployed Phoenix Wright, is that Christoph is incredibly evil. He gets convicted for the murder of Shady Smith, a man who definitely isn't going to be very important, and so Apollo loses his job and works for Phoenix instead. Despite this, Christoph's shadow looms over the entire game. This isn't helped by the fact that for the rest of the game, the opposing prosecutor is Christoph's younger brother, Clavier. He's also a rock star, which is mostly relevant for a great third case that I love and people definitely agree with me about. But the most important thing is that even Clavier can't be free of Christoph. When we see him again in the long and complex fourth case of the game, he's being accused of an entirely different crime, and this is where the web starts to unravel. That is all terribly interesting, but what does it actually mean for Apollo? The Gavin brothers are intrinsic to Apollo's character for better or for worse in many ways. Christoph's incident and eventual unraveling teaches Apollo a few very important lessons. He learns that the truth doesn't care about what you think. It doesn't care if you think highly of someone. Anyone can do something awful and hide it for years and years, convincing you of anything they want. Ultimately, Apollo learns that it's okay to be wrong, but if you are wrong and you learn that you're wrong, you have to work to uncover that truth. Even with Phoenix by his side, he has to face the reality that his mentor is not only a criminal, but he's the one that has to bring him to justice. The first case, where Christoph is convicted for his first murder, Apollo is just kind of along for the ride as much as everyone else. For this one though, he's in the cockpit, and he has control over exactly what's going on. He can't shy away from his responsibility to show the truth to the world, no matter how hard or difficult it is. It also teaches him that authority can't protect you forever, a lesson that comes very much in handy when he defends Dirk in Spirit of Justice against the tyrannical regime of Goran. Justice will be served, no matter who you are. The best bit about this is that we see the effects that Christoph has had on Apollo even outside of the game he's featured in. It all comes back to that final moment in Dual Destinies when Apollo interrupts the court to express Athena's guilt. His mistake and blindness in trusting Christoph taught him that you can't let emotion get in the way of justice, and he turns this on his co-worker and close friend because he just can't bear to make the same mistake again. This is why he cares so much about Phoenix proving her innocent, because he'd rather be wrong again than be blind to the truth and trust someone who doesn't deserve it. What's particularly fascinating is the approach that he takes. It is eerily similar to Christoph's own approach of evidence being everything. It does make sense after all. Apollo was his student for some time, and it's only natural that he would have internalized some of his lessons. It's a fascinating bit of character work that Christoph's own ideology is coming to the forefront within one of the people who hates him the most, against someone who is truly innocent. It would do Apollo a disservice, though, not to mention the effect that Christoph's brother Clavier has on our titular attorney. Clavier is an antagonistic force throughout the game, but more by purpose than nature. He's just a prosecutor, it's kind of his job. He and Apollo honestly have a great dynamic, which is somewhat surprising considering that neither of them really have character arcs. Their dynamic is mostly just the fact that Clavier is incredibly cool, and Apollo is, well, he does his best. Clavier is definitely portrayed as a bit of a pretty boy who may have just gotten his job because of his powerful brother, but the game shows that he is a force to be reckoned with in court. There's something to be said about Clavier tying into Apollo's perceptions being reworked throughout the game. He realizes Phoenix is capable of a lot more than just bluffing. He realizes that his boss isn't someone to be trusted, and he realizes that the glamorous Clavier has a lot more intelligence and emotion under his glittery image than he might initially show. The two lawyers have a lot of tension, we'll call it, as although Clavier is arrogant, flashy, and kind of rude, he's never mean to you in the same way that Edgeworth, Francisca, or Godot are. In a game where everyone, even your defendants, are guilty of something and love hiding information, Clavier is almost a breath of fresh air in the way that he seems to actively want to chase the truth. Ultimately, Apollo is changed massively by the people around him, and a lot of this is intentional. Although his character arc is a bit volatile, his consistent interactions and connections he has with everyone in every case are at the forefront of his development. Change is inevitable, even for justice, but it doesn't always come orderly. Gotcha! The main thing about Apollo, which has been seen in what we've talked about so far, is the fact that the rate of his character progression is incredibly inconsistent. What do I mean by that? Well, the fact of the matter is that Apollo doesn't really get to actually do anything in his own original game. When I was playing the first game, this fact stood out abundantly to me. He just has all of the events of the game just happen to/around him, and the backstory he has in it doesn't ever really impact him that much. It's much more of a deal for Trucy than him anyway, not like Trucy gets to do anything after this game. A lot of people have said in the past that the future games kind of butcher his character from Apollo Justice, but I'm inclined to disagree, mostly on the grounds that he doesn't really have a character in Apollo Justice. Without doing a dissection of the games itself, part of the reason for this, I think, is because Apollo Justice is super short, with only 4 cases and no DLC like Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. In my opinion, another case between 3 and 4 could have helped a lot to make Apollo feel more like a character, but I digress. His character progression in terms of a defined arc within Apollo Justice Ace Attorney is incredibly limited. When it does come, it comes quite quickly and suddenly. I struggle a little more to find examples of actual character signposting for Apollo, but the main thing is Kristoff's first and then second interrogation in court. Even outside of court, interactions with him are managed by Phoenix. Boy, he really doesn't get to do much, huh? Dual Destinies is also guilty of this. His personality changes pretty markedly from his previous incarnation as a kind of dork who gets bullied by Tracy into the cool action hero defending Juniper amidst other things, though still gets bullied by Tracy. But in terms of actual progression, it only comes incredibly out of nowhere in the final 2 cases. Disregarding the quality of the reveal itself, I find that it lessens the believability and overall cohesion of his character arc by having Clay's death and his reaction to it almost feeling shoehorned into an already existing plot. Although it logically makes sense that he would do all of this due to his feelings about Clay and his previously mentioned suspicion, it just happens so out of nowhere it ends up feeling inconsistent rather than punchy. Unsurprisingly, this also happens in Spirit of Justice. I mentioned earlier that Apollo is someone who is constantly moving forward and doesn't think about his past very often, but this does begin to change when we come back to Kurian with Dirk. It's established as a character trait that Apollo doesn't like talking about his past, almost as if the writers of the game actively acknowledge the fact that his backstories kind of come out of nowhere. It only really works for the final backstory, as there's a lot more reasoning in narrative as to why he wouldn't talk about it. Although it does make sense that Apollo would be cagey about his past, it means that there's a pretty significant disconnect when things about his past do come up, especially if it's not handled very well, like in the case of Clay. The final case with Dirk, in fact the final case that Apollo appears in as of making this video, his characterization moves at a breakneck pace. The case is already very long, fitting in Nayuta's entire character arc, and somehow it manages to also squeeze in the most compact character progression that he gets in the entire trilogy. Very cool. This might be a bit late to ask this question, but, well, what's the point? Why is the fact that Apollo's characterization is like this important to both himself and the game? So far, the analysis we've done of Apollo's character already has helped us understand the wider themes of the Apollo Justice Trilogy, being the balance of not only emotion and logic, but also of redemption and punishment. Apollo's character being inconsistent is of course a symptom of some iffy writing choices and troubled development, but it's much more interesting to me personally to try to interpret it as something different, something more. Apollo being inconsistently written ultimately can be seen as a commentary on the malleability of truth and the effect it can have on a person. In a series with many characters that strive to find out the absolute truth, having a character who regularly keeps information from his friends and colleagues changes the way that this central theme is interacted with across the series. Instead of it being a straightforward, telling the truth is always right idea, not that it's been that simple in the past, Apollo's backstory and character inconsistencies show us that the truth isn't straightforward, and trying to push it out of people when they're not ready can have some undesirable side effects. We see this in some cases, Tendo in 6-4, Machi in 4-3, and Athena in 5-5 for example, where there is a range between trauma and just personal preference that can all get ignored for the sake of truth or justice. Meanwhile, Apollo at the center of it reflects this need to respect the privacy of others while also balancing it with a desire for truth. This idea of lying for personal protection is especially highlighted in Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, where Phoenix also hides a lot of his past and intentions from Apollo. I guess Kristoff isn't the only mentor Apollo learnt from. For everyone in the series though, they do eventually need to accept their truth, even if it's hard. As Ace Attorney shows time and time again, the truth will eventually come out. It just depends on whose terms it does so. Apollo learns this lesson eventually in Spirit of Justice, accepting the truth of Dirk's death as well as the positive impact he had on his life, and it resolves his entire character arc. Phoenix accepts that the world of law will always need him, and he needs it in much the same way, and so stops holding back and rejoins the legal fray. Athena struggles through her own truth and eventually comes through the other side a healthier and more complete person. Truth and lies can deeply affect a person, and by hiding things from others you can hurt the people around you, but more importantly, you can hurt yourself. You hold yourself back from being the person you could be. Apollo's strange characterization and character progression, although likely unintentional, ends up contributing quite a bit to the thematics of the Apollo Justice Trilogy, for better or for worse. Optimistically, I like to think that it's for the better. That's all she wrote for this video, apart from all the bits I'm now going to write in the outro. I hope you all enjoyed a bit of an odd video topic this time around, really, keeping it broad. I'm not someone who chases the algorithm or views, and I wanted to break my small hiatus with something that I was really passionate about. I sure hope I don't care about views, considering how my Explorers of Sky video went, but I do this for the love of the game, not the clout. The clout helps, though. Working on a few videos at once really did help my creativity a lot as well, so that's a good lesson to learn. Speaking of which, I've got something incredibly ambitious planned for the next video. My triumphant return to Deltarune theorizing is going to be quite an event. I'm going to try to actually answer some big questions about the nature of the game and the Deltarune world as a whole, perhaps even more than just Deltarune. I won't spoil anything else about it so far, but I think it'll be very, very interesting. Thank you as always to my gracious patrons Michael Bates, Meggie, Zalgo, Tyree Fitzhugh, and Nigel Robinson for their continued support even throughout me not making videos. It truly means a lot. Until next time, I've been Vivet Veritas, and I'll see you again soon.